Starting June 13th, Israel launched an unprovoked bombing campaign on Iran, killing at least 430 civilians and wounding thousands. On June 21st and 22nd, the United States joined the attack. Since then, a tenuous ceasefire has been reached between Israel and Iran, and the 12-day hot conflict has, at least for now, taken a pause. One doctor in Tehran described the aftermath of the initial attack 4 weeks ago as a bloodbath, proclaiming that, quote, "We were overwhelmed by chaos and the screams of grieving family members," unquote. The US and Israel justify their assault in Iran as a preemptive strike against their nuclear program, the now decades-old boogeyman used to drum up popular support for antagonistic posturing and threats against Iran. But we've seen this episode before. It's a rerun of the same lie told against Iraq in 2002 to 2003. While in the West, we're told that a conflict with Iran would trigger World War III given their nuclear capabilities, in reality, the world should fear the US and Israel first and foremost. The US has more than 5,000 nuclear warheads and is the only nation in history to have used them in war against the Japanese civilians in 1945 at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Meanwhile, Israel has refused UN inspection of its estimated 100 to 200 nuclear weapons. Both of these cases are unsurprising, given that the two operate on the bloodthirsty logics of imperialism and Zionism. The real plan behind the attacks, which was disclosed by Israeli broadcaster Channel 14, reportedly seeks to, quote, destabilize Iran's government through systematic bombing of strategic sites while coercing mass evacuation from densely populated areas, unquote. Defense Minister Israel Katz warned, quote, Tehran will be treated like Beirut, end quote, in reference to Israel's ongoing attacks on Lebanon. Israel is exploiting the unpopularity of the Iranian regime to try and gain support for their assault. In a televised address to the Iranian public between bombings, Netanyahu claimed, "We are clearing the path for you to achieve your objective, which is freedom." As Bella Beragi wrote in Red Flag, quote, "This narrative that bombing people while they sleep will facilitate their freedom from the forces of political oppression has been repeated time and again during Israel's genocide in Gaza," unquote. The same lie was used to justify toppling Iraq in 2003 and has been a rallying cry for Western, quote unquote, democratic interventions and regime changes the world round. Western media outlets are trotting out figures like Reza Pahlavi, the son of the disgraced former dictator of Iran, who says that Israeli strikes will help liberate the country. Did Western bombs free the people of Iraq or Libya? As Iran's missiles struck Israel, including a hospital in Beersheba, the Israeli military decried attacking hospitals as a crime. Are we to believe that after 2 years of bombing hospitals and flattening Gaza, Israel has suddenly discovered international human rights law? World leaders speak of restraint while continuing to send arms to the genocidal apartheid state of Israel. Democrats chastise Trump for acting without congressional approval while still framing Iran as the belligerent enemy. None of them have an ounce of respect for democratic rights. Israel and the US have brought catastrophe and genocide to the whole Middle East with a bloodthirsty doctrine of reaction, domination, annihilation, and supremacy, while most of the civilized world has stood by and supported it. Western media and politicians have spent the past 21 months downplaying, obfuscating, justifying, and flat out burying the horrors in Gaza. Biragi puts it starkly. Tens of thousands of Palestinians and thousands of Lebanese have been slaughtered with impunity. The calculation now is that hundreds or thousands of Iranians added to the toll will not be of any international consequence. But each death is more than a number. It's a child who will never become an adult. It's a family torn apart forever. Even as Trump has posed as peacemaker at times, the US government and its ruling class are directly responsible for this war. Besides the US's own bombing, Israel would never be able to commit genocide against Palestine or attack Iran without US funding and backing. Israel's the US's watchdog in the Middle East, a watchdog that sometimes slips the leash in pursuit of their shared goals. The US may bristle as Israel disrupts the stability it needs to dominate the region, but it is always willing to fund, justify, and manufacture consent for the Zionist entity's crimes. But with all of this, we must understand we need to go beyond an anti-war movement. We need anti-imperialism. The U.S. ruling class has hated Iran since the revolution in 1979 removed the Shah dictatorship, a key prop of U.S. imperialism in the region. From Jimmy Carter on, Republicans and Democrats alike have sanctioned the Islamic Republic regime, severely crippling the people of Iran. The U.S. backed Iraq. The U.S. backed Iraq in the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, resulting in the slaughter of over 450,000 people. Even the peace plan imposed by the U.S., just like the nuclear treaty negotiated under Obama, was a way for imperial control over Iran. Anti-war sentiment must be clear on opposing the system, capitalism, we have to name it, that drives countries to carve up and dominate the world through imperialism. It is not just Netanyahu or Trump, but the entire superstructure of world capital that reeks of violence and hypocrisy. We would be remiss to say that the ruling classes of the region are not without blame. Some, like Egypt's Sisi or the Saudi royal family, are in bed with the US and Israel. Egypt's security forces just recently attacked and deported a mass caravan of North African and international activists trying to break the siege on Gaza. Others, like the Gulf monarchies or Turkey, deploy rhetoric supporting Palestine, but fear protests for Palestine might get out of hand and threaten their own regimes. Palestine solidarity protests were one of the ferments of the Arab Spring/MENA revolutions of 2011 to 2013. We know that revolutions in countries across the region could establish workers' governments that could offer real, not rhetorical, support to the people of Palestine and Iran. Iran, for its part, has jockeyed into position as a regional power. It has built up allies and proxies that have served the cause of Palestinian liberation at turns, like the Houthis in Yemen, and undermined it at others. Iran and the Lebanese militia it backs, Hezbollah, assisted Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad's regime in its brutal repression of Palestinians and solidarity with Palestine. Together, they flattened Yarmouk, the Palestinian refugee camp in Syria, during its aforementioned revolution in 2011. That enclave was once home to beloved Palestinian activist and just freed political prisoner Mahmoud Khalil's mother's family. Far from leading a quote-unquote axis of resistance, the Iranian government protects its own interests first and foremost, just like any other capitalist state. In the past decade, Iran has seen massive popular protests and workers' strikes and faced severe state repression. Western sanctions have devastated the economy, while the theocratic and military elite loot what they can from it. As Firebrand, we stand with Iran's exploited and oppressed against their rulers, without falling into the trap of supporting imperialist attacks against Iran. We also reject the US and Israel's cynical appropriation of the Kurdish slogan, Woman, Life, Freedom, to justify their aggression, as if either had any interest in women's liberation. Dealing with the theocracy in Iran is up to the Iranian people, not any other state or its bombs. As Iranian poet Sahar Delejani wrote, yes, the Iranian people have been fighting against a brutal dictatorship for decades. No, that does not in any way justify the blatant, unprovoked act of war committed by Israel against Iranian land and people. As revolutionary socialists in the US, our main enemy is the US empire, including what Netanyahu called a, quote, mighty aircraft carrier of our common civilization, unquote, which is the Zionist state. Our main slogan, especially as bombs fall or did fall on Iran, remains US and Israel out of the Middle East, down with imperialism and Zionism, defeat to the US and Israel. Thanks, comrades.
All right, I'll just go jump in. That was excellent, comrade. 100% underscore everything you said. And I'm going to be pretty brief, I think, just to try to touch on a few things that I think amplify what you've said. Some of my comments are going to draw from an article from Puntorojo from late June when the US made its decision to bomb in support of Israel, to bomb Iran. And I'll just make a couple of like historical points, and then I want to talk a little bit about how we might think about the current moment as we organize ourselves as revolutionaries in the U.S. It's not a secret that the U.S. has been meddling and using the Middle East as a playpen for imperialism, at least since the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, which, as Chelsea said, created essentially a watchdog or proxy for US power and access to oil, and also to appease Christian Zionists who constitute, as we all know now, a significant bloc of the far right to this day in the US. In 1953, the United States carried out a coup of the Iranian government over Mossadegh with the assistance of the British. This was done as part of the US attempting to make sure that Iran remained within its so-called sphere of interest after World War II. The bombing that has taken place 3 weeks ago is simply a continuation of the US refusing to allow Iran or any state in the world, especially in the Middle East, anything like independence or sovereignty from US political and economic needs. In 1967, the United States backed Israel in a really decisive war that was crucial to expanding its settler colonial project. Israel acquired pieces of Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and this current attack on the people of Iran is simply an ongoing process to justify and continue the expansion of the Israeli settler colonial state. It's obviously worth remembering when we talk to folks here in the U.S., the U.S. is a settler colonial state. Israel is a settler colonial state. These are brothers and sisters under the skin of empire. And we have to understand exactly one of the reasons that the U.S. is so full-throated in support of another settler colonial regime is because it understands that as essential to its own identity and its processes of capital accumulation. I really appreciate what Chelsea has said about being real about the character of the Iranian regime. It is a capitalist, repressive, theocratic state. We are not campus. We do not consider Iran to be part of an axis of resistance to Western empire. Instead, we understand Iran, the state of Iran, the ruling class of Iran, essentially to be interested in upholding, expanding its own power, its own capitalist apparatus, and using repression by any means to do that, which really means that we stand with the working class of Iran. We do not stand with the ruling class of Iran. And that distinguishes us from other folks with really bad political positions on the current war against the Iranian people. And in fact, as we always say, the key to liberation in the Middle East is the working class of the Arab states until they enact their own self-emancipation, as Marx would say. There is no business of the U.S. or Israel or any other, or the Iranian ruling class in trying to dictate the self-determination of oppressed peoples in that part of the world. And this is also true, I think, for the Palestinian crisis. I mean, we must understand, we've always held that the liberation of the Palestinians absolutely depends upon the wider Arab working class in that region. Palestinian people are relatively small, disempowered, isolated, especially at this point in history, so that the emancipation of Palestine and the emancipation of Iran are both projects of the working class of that part of the world. And obviously, the U.S. and Israel are the two states most committed to attempting to make sure that that doesn't happen. One other point I would make about the decision of the U.S. to engage in bombing, Trump has attempted to walk this sort of new post, rules-based order line in the Middle East via the Abraham Accords and trying to establish some kind of détente between the Arab states and Israel, primarily to enhance capital accumulation between those states. Israel's settler colonial project here has kind of trumped that and forced the U.S. to act in a way against what Trump thought was its own interest or its own attempt at creating a new capitalist order in the Middle East. And this is really the power of settler colonial ideology in Israel, which is an absolutely genocidal politics of no return. And I think it's really worth understanding that the U.S. has really no idea, I believe at this point, what's going to be the outcome in Israel? I think it is absolutely happy to see the genocide continue to unfold, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it can predict what's going to be the implications of that in the region. The other thing I wanted to say is, as we talk about, we always understand imperialism as an external projection of the repression of the working class outside of our borders, so that the working class inside of our borders can also be repressed. And it's really critical that we understand that process here, that every Palestinian, Arab, radical student, and worker opposing the genocide, imposing US imperialism, is caught up in an imperialist process of attempted resistance. And I agree with Chelsea. We need both an anti-war and an anti-imperialist perspective. But I think we should also understand that the Zionism has become a gateway for fascism, both in the United States and outside of the United States. Most of the states that are moving rapidly in the direction of some kind of authoritarian regime really admire Israel as an ethno-nationalist project. Clearly, the Trump administration does as well. So the politics of white supremacy, Christian Zionism, and Israeli Zionism are part of an effort to create a new, I think, global world order. And the war against Iran is a part of an attempt to see if that order is possible. So we have a lot to do as revolutionaries. We have a lot of people to whom we are responsible: the Iranian working class, the Palestinians, and the working class of the United States, which without question is already fodder for this continuous war. And we obviously stand as revolutionaries with the US working class in this instance as well. So I'll stop there. Looking forward to the conversation.